My next guest is an investigator from a watchdog group featured on CBS News, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and CNN. Why? Well, they do one thing. They expose churches and pastors who shamelessly use unethical practices to bleed God-fearing people of their hard-earned money so they can live lives of luxury. Here's my conversation with Pete Evans of the Trinity Foundation. I think I caught wind of what you guys were doing. I think it was an episode of Inside Edition. And I just kind of find myself rooting for you guys.
Oh, thank you.
And here's why. Like, two things that can infuriate me is abuse of the elderly, abuse of kids. And I guess the third thing you throw in is abuse of those who are trying to, be devoted worshipers to whatever spiritual or religious cause that they have. And it was kind of funny. I actually had a chuckle to myself. So I was like, I know there are different kinds of investigators. There's investigators of, war criminals. There's investigators of, various types of abuse. Why don't you share with people the type of investigators you are with the Trinity Foundation?
We're private investigators. And in the 90s, we decided that we were helping Diane Sawyer and Primetime Live shoot an episode about 3 televangelists. And pretty soon we realized that it would be helpful for us to have investigative licenses here in Texas. So unfortunately, private investigative licenses don't give us the same leeway as law enforcement. We can't look into somebody's finances at all. We can't look at somebody's bank account. But you mentioned Inside Edition a minute ago. They called us last year and asked me if I would come help them when they were doing an investigation of the televangelists that were speaking at a conference in Branson, Missouri. And so they flew me to Branson. They provided my plane ticket and hotel room. And I was able to park outside of the conference one night. And I saw the bodyguards and all of Copeland's team get out and get in his limo. And so the next day, we were, the producer and I were about to go to breakfast. And I said, let's just swing by and see if Copeland is there. He's probably not there because he's scheduled to speak this evening. And so we drove over there, and sure enough, his limo was there. And so I said, that's where I parked last night. You guys can park there. And I'll go wait at the exit to see if he's leaving by some other means. And so they parked in the grass about 50 feet from his limo, and he came out and bodyguards, and they ran across the street with their cameras and their microphone, and that usually doesn't last very long. It's usually like the bodyguards will say, no, get away. But instead, he hung over the back of the door and gave them a 20-minute interview. Maybe not quite that long. But the Inside Edition people were really happy. The producer said, hey, Pete, if you hadn't have suggested that, if you hadn't helped us figure that out, we wouldn't have gotten this interview that went viral. So that doesn't happen very often, that a television show will ask me to come help. But it was fun, and I did it. But normally what we do, most of the information we get is from computer searches online. And we're looking at county appraiser records. We're looking at the grantor records on county clerk websites. We use social media a lot, Facebook, and sometimes we'll find a family that has posted pictures of their jet. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of that. Let me X out of that. Hang on just a second.
Sure.
All right, there we go. So anyway, the social media and a lot of looking at financial data for Forms 990. Do you know what a 990 is? Would you like me to explain to your audience what a Form 990 is? Okay. Most nonprofits, the majority of nonprofits in this country have to file what's called a Form 990, and there are various levels of that form. But it tells how much salary the leaders of the organizations, various different organizations, are making. It tells where the money's going, how much they're spending on travel, how much they're spending on office supplies, on legitimate charity expenses. And usually for the people we investigate, the ones that do file 990s, the charity expenses are very low. I could go for some examples like the Trinity Broadcasting. They consider their own broadcast to be their mission. And so the actual charity, actual money that goes to feed the poor is very little. It's a minuscule amount compared to how much money is coming in. So the Form 990 will tell a lot of information, but unfortunately, churches and church-related organizations don't have to file a 990. And so we are limited in the information that we can find because of their lack of data. Churches don't have to tell anything to the public. They don't have to, their salaries are secret. And it's not a bad thing. And in some cases, it's a good thing. Like if you have a church with half a dozen ministers and you don't want everybody comparing salaries with each other. But with organizations like, I'll pick on Kenneth Copeland or Benny Hinn or Creflo Dollar, these guys are making big bucks. And they're living in mansions and they're flying private jets. And these are the kind of people that you want to see the salaries for. And so my recommendation is for organizations that earn a certain amount of money, like say over $3 to $5 million yearly, to have to file a 990. Mega churches, for example. You wouldn't want the small Baptist church on the corner with 100 members have to hire a CPA for $5,000 that they can't afford to file a Form 990. So there has to be a limit, and you'd overwhelm the IRS anyway. That's a whole nother subject we can get into later this hour, is how undermanned the IRS is and how overwhelmed they are with trying to police hundreds of thousands of different nonprofit organizations.
Do you actually come from an investigative background?
I don't. The first time I was asked to investigate was in 1993. I went in undercover in a printing factory with a hidden camera for Fox News. That was before Fox News became a political channel. And unfortunately, they were threatened by one of the lawyers that represented most of the televangelists that we were seeing. And so they threw away all the hidden camera footage, never aired. But what we did find out is that dozens of different televangelists were using the same writer for their letters and the same printing plates. And so they would print off like 100,000 letters from several different televangelists. And then it would go and it would be signed by the particular, it wouldn't be actually signed. It would be digitally signed in a second procedure. They would send the letters through another printer that would be a different color of ink that would make it look like these letters were personally signed by this particular televangelist and had your name at the top, because that's when, that's about the time that it became really popular to personalize letters, to personalize mailings to people around the country. Now you get it all the time. Dear Imani, we're praying for you. We're praying for your aunt. And so these letters at that time, they could add a paragraph and that said that was particular to you, to the prayer request that had been entered in the computer, that they got your prayer request back. And so they entered your aunt or your grandmother has cancer. We're praying for her. And sign your brothers and sisters or sign brother Tilton or brother Hen, whatever at the time. So some of these mailings were more flagrant than others, with big bold letters on the outside of the envelope that would say, urgent, open immediately, addressee only, confidential. And you'd open it up and you'd unfold a prayer rug that, like a paper rug that looked like a rug, and you're supposed to stand on it and pray. Or you find a picture of a wallet and it's just a piece of paper that you unfold, and it's like, this is your wallet. God is going to bless your finances. And put this under your pillow for 3 days and pray over it, and God is going to bless you. And by the way, God wants your best financial gift right now. Make a vow of $1,000 and God will bless you and answer your prayers. And so, the fraud and we believe it was fraud per se. And one of the lawyers for some of these televangelists, a guy named J.C. Joyce, famous quote of his was, "We even believe it's in God's interest." I can't remember exact word, but it's okay to defraud people in God's name. And we're just going, what did he just say? And we got a recording of it somewhere. But this guy successfully defended an organization called St. Matthew's Churches. Have you heard of it at all?
No.
St. Matthew's Churches, they send out letters to thousands of people around the country, to the poorest people in our society. Many of their employees will look through census records to find the poorest, most illiterate people in our society, and they'll blanket that area with what they call prospecting. They're literally prospecting for new donors, and as one.
So they're specifically targeting a very particular group.
Yeah, because it's really the most illiterate people in our society that are more susceptible to getting, say, this prayer rug or this prayer wallet or this penny that's been blessed in the River Jordan. They're susceptible to things that look religious because they haven't read their Bible. They don't know, and so that's what their employees are doing when they're looking through census records. And then they will blanket the area with a letter that says, For instance, I'm going to pick on you for a second. Dear Imani, we don't want your money. Don't send us money right now. Send us your prayer request. Tell us everything that's going. We know you're living a difficult life, and life is tough. Please send us your prayer request. So who wouldn't respond to that kind of a solicitation? And it's signed your brothers and sisters at St. Matthew's churches. And there's a guy behind that, Reverend Gene Ewing, but we can get into that later. But so you send your information in, that gets entered into a database, and so now you're hooked. They have your address, some cases your phone number and your address to make solicitation phone calls as well, and that's when the requests for small donations start. And and they'll always say, and if you can make a bigger donation, please do. And then the ones who make a bigger donation, then they get asked for even bigger donations. And they go on to what's called an A donor list. And the people who send in can only send in $5 or $10. They go on the B or C donor list. And then it's almost impossible to get off these lists. It almost takes an act of God, so to speak. You have to contact. First off, most of the time, you can't even reach a personal employee of the organization. You're reaching the fulfillment center, and all they want is to get more money from you because that's their job. And I would hate to be working in those call centers. I mean, it's got to be a terrible job. But that's one aspect of this whole televangelist. That's the seediest part of it. And then you have certain varying degrees of respectability that some preachers will use some of the same mailing lists, but their letters won't be quite as ridiculous, quite as obvious. And so anyway, you asked me if I belong to a particular religion. I do consider myself a Christian. I prefer the term believer personally, but I am not out to bring down the church at all. I'm out to expose fraud and excess.
My impression of you and your organization is, and first I want to say that not coming from an investigative background doesn't mean that you can't do good investigative work. So I want to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is the kind of endeavor or job that sounds like it really has to be near and dear to your heart to continue to do it. And what may be surprising to a lot of people, like you spoke about people who may not be very educated, is the level of sophistication that these pastors, they're running these churches, these mega churches and these medium and small size churches like a business. And from what it sounds like, and my own observation is that they're very sophisticated in targeting the kind of people that they're going to reach out to. They're very sophisticated into, using the messaging and using very deliberate wording across the cycle of a person's lifetime. And I think for somebody who may not be very business savvy or just a little bit savvy about what's going on in the world, they can really be vulnerable to that. So a question I have for you is how do you guys determine who you're going to target as a pastor or one of these churches?
The first thing I want to respond to your opinion, your observation about the sophistication of these mega churches, mega ministries, and it's very sophisticated. They're run like businesses. In many cases, they go through fulfillment centers, like we talked about, and the fulfillment center will do. They'll use demographics, and so a certain demographic will get a certain letter, and another elderly demographic will get a totally different letter, designed to be personalized to meet the wants and the specific proclivities of the people they're speaking to. And so, how we determine who we investigate can come from complaints that we receive. We don't get as many complaints as we used to, but people will contact us via email or telephone.
Are these parishioners?
Mm-hmm. Parishioners, donors, almost equal these days. We'll get parishioners of various churches around the country and donors of various televangelists around the country. And because if you're a donor, you're not really a member of their church, although they consider you a member of their church. So they call it, usually the term is partner. You're partnering with us. Well, no, you're not partnering with them. You're just giving them your money and letting them do exactly what they want to do with the money. And that's always misrepresented, in my opinion, almost always misrepresented to some degree. We're feeding hundreds of thousands of people. Are you really? We've rescued hundreds of thousands of slaves, like Rod Parsley says. Well, have you really rescued hundreds of thousands of slaves in Africa? I find that hard to believe. We're building water wells. Okay. You may be building a few water wells, but how many are you building, and how much of that money is actually going to your ministry? So that's one way that we figure out who we're going to investigate is through complaints, phone calls. Another method is just the smell test. If we come across somebody that's making prophecies, 2020 is going to be. We had so many prophecies at the beginning of the year. 2020 is going to be a great year, and then the coronavirus hits, and then and then people, 2020 coronavirus is going to be gone in a month. I praise God. Well, I'm sorry, it wasn't gone in a month, and so that makes us very curious about who the background of these people that are claiming to speak in God's name.
And when you are investigating these churches, based on what you refer to as the smell test or some complaints from some parishioners, is there any pushback from the church or the staff itself?
In the early 90s, we would receive death threats, but not so much after that. I will get a call every once in a while from somebody that says, "You guys are the real sinners. You guys are the you're going to hell." But that doesn't happen very often anymore. It did happen, especially after we helped with a major expose on ABC or NBC. When we helped with expose Benny Hinn, we would get supporters of Benny Hinn that would call us and just deride us and say, "You guys shouldn't be exposing other people in the name of God. That's harmful to the cause of Christ." Well, no, it's not. You look at the early Christians, you look at the early church, the Apostle Paul and the other apostles, they called out heresy. They named names, people that were more interested in self-gain. more interested in getting money rather than in the cause of Christ. And so that we're following a sort of a time-honored tradition. And what did Jesus do? I mean, he went into the temple and he turned over the money changers' tables and took out a whip and he drove them out of the temple. That's pretty serious. He actually drove the people that were making money off of the name of God. He drove them out of, he said, this is my Father's house. No, don't make it into a den of thieves. And it's time for us to drive out the den of thieves in this country.
Once you launch your investigations and you start uncovering what could be very, serious and compelling evidence, telling you that there's something seriously going wrong, like what happens after that?
A variety of things. We do publicize some of our findings. We write articles on Facebook and on our website. And we also have a website in Spanish, which I don't post as often as I like. But we also collaborate with law enforcement from time to time. But mostly the collaboration is one way because that, for instance, with the IRS, we provide reports to the IRS very often, but the information generally goes one way. They can't tell us whether they're in the midst of an investigation or not. We just know that they encourage us. They say, please, please bring us more of these reports. They help us. He said, we can't just initiate reports on our own. We have to go by information like you're providing us. And so there's that. We have, in the past, worked a little bit with the FBI, not much. I can't say we worked with them often. Tried to give them a report a year ago, and they looked at it. They were interested for about a week, and they said we declined to investigate. I'm not sure that they actually did that for our sake, or and whether they're still investigating or not. But like I said, even with the FBI, it would be when it does happen, it's usually a one-way deal. We give them what we have and let it go. So, but we do provide information to major news outlets. We work with Inside Edition very often. I was undercover with a camera in the mid-'90s in a cult for Inside Edition. And that cult was called the Word of Faith Fellowship. And things were bad then. They were trying to scream the devils out of their congregation, out of the members. And you would really, just really screaming, shaking bodies. And I underwent those kind of blasting sessions, is what they call, on 11 different occasions. Of course, the leader doesn't like to call them blasting, but she admits that that's what they're doing. They're blasting the demons. And anyway, I digress from our investigation for a minute, but there's a book out, if anybody's interested, by a couple of AP reporters called Broken Faith, by Mitch Weiss and a guy named Holbrook. So they've interviewed 2 years ago. They interviewed over 100 ex-members, and the church is even worse than when Inside Edition and when we helped Inside Edition expose them in the mid-'90s.
In terms of money, how much money? Can you say how much money some of these mega churches are making, and what some of the salaries are with the more senior people like the pastor and whoever will be the second and third in command?
In the 2000s, some of the people we were investigating, like Benny Hinn, admitted publicly that they were getting about $150 million a year going through their organization. That's about 15 years ago. It's a lot of money. And we were, in 2005, we found a particular lawyer that worked for Benny Hinn and a number of other televangelists, and we were raiding their dumpster 5 nights a week because that's how often the trash would come pick up out of that dumpster. And we found information, N numbers of jets, names of personal companies owned. We found a letter from a guy that had a homosexual relationship with Paul Crouch Sr. that was outing himself because he felt like the hypocrisy was too great, and we were worked with the LA Times on that. But I'm losing track of your question for a second. Can you repeat the question again?
I was just really trying to get a sense of the kind of money.
That's what led me down that trail. Sorry. So we found Benny Hinn's salary in the trash. We found and his family, and his daughter, who was 18, was making $90,000 a year, just her first year on the job, or it might have been 60, and her son-in-law $90,000. And Benny Hinn was making $1.6 million, I believe, at the time, plus another $400,000 a year from another document we found from another company that was privately owned called Clarion Call Marketing. And it was all legal. He signed a document saying that he was a consultant. So it was a consultant's fee that he was getting from this organization. But this organization was selling his personal products back to the ministry. Clarion Call Marketing was selling the DVDs and Benny Hinn's books back to the ministry so they could give the books out again to donors so people could feel like they're getting something in exchange for their donation. They say, okay, for a donation of $25, we'll send you this little pamphlet. Or for a donation of $100, we'll send you this Benny Hinn Bible. Or for a donation of $250, we'll send you this little replica of a doorpost with blessings from God. So it's barely legal in my mind, and in the people I work with. I think it's immoral, but it's legal the way they were doing it.
Okay.
But the salary of that family was well over $2 million when you added all the money together. His wife was making $240,000 a year, and she would appear on the show a few times, and they're back to other organization salaries. We've looked at the people that run television networks, like Kevin Adele, who runs the Word Network. He was making $5 million in a year in some cases. And so he lost his tax-exempt status, and he reinvented his organization as a church. So there's no way to know how much he's making now. He could be making more now. That's Kevin Adele, who owns and runs the Word Network. Then there's David Cirillo, who runs what used to be INSP, Inspirational Network. And he was making millions of dollars a year. It still is. Then there's the matter of televangelist jets. Like Kenneth Copeland's organization has a couple of jets. They have a Gulfstream 4. They have a Citation 10, which was state of the art 10 or 15 years ago, and still may be the fastest private jet that flies.
Yeah. So
I'm not saying he owns these personally.
Mm-hmm.
But we counted over 170 trips to his resort home up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, in the jet that's owned by his ministry, and that doesn't include hunting trips and things like that we found about in the 2000s.
The more you talk about this sounds like a retail business model, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So you have a retailer like Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
They have this big space, and within that space, they have shelves of different kinds of goods and products, and there's different price points, and they're selling different goods depending on what people's needs or the customer's needs may be. And when I compare that to some of these mega churches and televangelists, it sounds like a very similar business model in that, oh, okay, well, you're a person who has an illness. Well, we have a product for you. We're going to send you that little rug, like you mentioned, or we'll send you this wallet, or we'll cater to whatever your emotional needs are, or wherever your sensibilities are, and I'm sure they're collecting information, and they have assigned a price to what people in different backgrounds are willing to pay for that.
Or in some cases, they're also sending out letters that say, God, make your first fruit offering, like Paula White, letters from Paula White. Say, make your, quote, your first fruit offering, and God will bless you and heal you. He'll heal you financially. He'll heal you. This is your year of blessing. And so they're using a lot of the same terminology that a salesman would use. This is your year. This is buy this product. This is gonna make your life wonderful. And that's we used to call it God's heavenly lottery. You give money to this, and God, you're on this wheel of fortune, so to speak, and God is gonna bless you. You're giving to this heavenly lottery. But the problem is it only works for the people that are at the top, the televangelists that are getting the money. And it's going to work from time to time just by the laws of chance and nature. And there are people that are going to give and get a check in the mail a week or two later that they would have gotten anyway. And so now it's God. God answered my prayer, and so. But especially this church called St. Matthew's Churches that I was telling you about.
Where are they based?
They're based. They've been based in California and Los Angeles. Then they came to Dallas. Now they seem to be based in Tulsa,
Oklahoma,
right?
Okay.
So, but their money still comes to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to a P.O. box in Tulsa, and it goes through a caging operation. And it was in the basement of their lawyer, and I don't know if it still is or not. But there would be 10 or 12 people opening the mail, putting the money in one basket and putting the checks in another, and putting the prayer requests in another, because like I said, the prayer requests are important to their operation. And the prayer requests put in a bag and taken to a bank of generally foreign nationals that are low-paid computer operators, and they enter in your name and your address if it changed, and they keep the databases current and your prayer requests, so that the next letter you get is going to say, just like it did in the 90s, it's going to say, "Dear Imani, we're praying for your loved one that she be healed, or that he be healed. God would bless you and heal your financial situation." And so this caging operation for St. Matthew's churches is probably still in Tulsa, but like you were talking about product, that's people are the end product in the religion business.
Let's talk about them a little more. So you're obviously, it sounds like you and your colleagues are putting forth a lot of effort into uncovering the details.
Mm-hmm.
And you present those details. Are there parishioners that get acquainted or see your evidence and yet still deny? I guess the simple way to put it, are the parishioners that see the evidence that you have, are they still defending these churches and these preachers?
Absolutely.
And how are they doing that?
And it comes from experience. I don't usually challenge people anymore that are donors. And when a family member calls us and says, "Help, my mother's given all of our inheritance money to this preacher," I usually say, you got to tell her you love her. You got to tell her that you got to approach this with kid gloves, so to speak. You've got to say, "Hey, did you know, Mom, that they're living in a $12 million mansion?" In the case of like Benny Hinn years ago, or in the case of Copeland, $6 million mansion would be or probably more on the open market. So you've got to say, "Hey, did you know about their lavish lifestyle here? You know about the private jet? They use it for trips to their resort home or whatever. Or did you know about so and so's salary? And did you know that they said that God was going to bless 2020 with a year of healing, and there will be no sickness, and look what's happening now." You've got to take it one step at a time with a loved one who is steeped in this. Now, as for me talking, I don't generally talk to people. I don't get into arguments with people. But what happens is when you donate money to an organization, you feel invested in that organization. And so you want to defend it. You want to believe that God is going to bless you, and that for some reason, you haven't gotten your blessing yet, but it's there. Maybe it's my own sin that's blocking this blessing, or maybe I haven't given enough money to God, and that's what you'll hear from the televangelist. It's sin in your life, or you haven't given till it. You've got to give till it hurts, so to speak. It's got to be a sacrificial offering, or else God won't honor it. Well, maybe I didn't give enough, sacrifice enough, or could be. There's a third one that's generally used too that I can't remember right offhand, but it all puts it back onto the donor. The reason they haven't gotten their miracle blessing from God.
The psychology of this is is pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like very much like there's a script that these pastors and these organizations go off of. And, it covers a bunch of scenarios like, oh, well, you're hurting financially. You haven't given enough for God.
I have an anecdotal story that happened over a decade ago. A woman gave thousands of dollars to Benny Hinn's organization.
Mm-hmm.
And we were successful. We talked to one of Benny Hinn's lawyers at the time, and a lawyer that we actually had helped with another matter. And he was able to get money back for this woman. And so I got a call from her about a year later, And she said, I gave a couple $1,000s again to this ministry. Can you help me get it back again? And I said, oh no, I can't. I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't do that. We got the money back for you once. That's the best we can do. And so we had a name for people that do that, are called chronic tithers. Now, there's one family, Larry and Darcy Fardet, who were willing to go public with their chronic tithing habit. They gave to all kinds of many different televangelists on several different Christian television networks, and they tried to get their daughter got lupus, and they tried to get all of these televangelists. They contacted all of them to try to get help from the ministries to help her daughter, because they were at the time they were running out of money, and their daughter's medical expenses were going through the roof, and they didn't know how they could help their daughter. And so but it was all in vain. Not a one of these televangelist organizations were willing to help. The typical answer on the phone that they got was our mandate from our board of directors, or our mandate from our bylaws. Don't allow us to give money back to help personally, but tell us what you're going through, and we will pray for you. Well, what's up? That they needed money, they didn't need prayer at that point, and the organizations had the ability to do it and just wouldn't. And it's because the people working for the organizations are protecting their organization because they get a salary from the organization. And so there's so many different ways we could take this whole thing now, but that was very disappointing for the Fardet family. We ended up raising a couple $1,000s on a GoFundMe page for the Fardet family.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very appreciative. And our church also gave them hundreds of dollars on a few different occasions for rent. They're doing okay now. They've turned their life around. They were homeless for a while. We helped them out with some money for their daughter, but the last I heard from them about a year ago is that they were doing okay.
Well, you said these people went homeless for a little while?
Yeah.
So are there other extreme cases of people who donate money that they don't have?
There was one woman in Louisiana, Ann Parker, and Bonnie Parker, maybe Bonnie Ann Parker. Anyway, her daughter, Christy Beach, was there in the final days of her life. She realized that her mother had been giving hundreds of dollars to the Copeland ministry,
mm-hmm.
and stuffing envelopes with hundreds of dollars. And they finally looked at it, and they figured it had to be close to over tens of thousands of dollars that had been sent. When she was dying of breast cancer, Bonnie Parker was. And so as she was dying, she was getting her granddaughter to help put the money in the envelopes because she didn't want her children to know what she was doing. And her husband, Alvin, kept it from him as well. He didn't realize till later. But it was a very sad story. Christy was very helpful to our organization, helped us use some, we interviewed her, and there's some footage that was used. Are you familiar with Last Week Tonight? John Oliver did a show. Yeah.
I watch it every week.
Okay. Well, he did a show on televangelists that they sent their producer here to Texas for 3 or 4 days, several days. And we gave them suggestions, and they used the main suggestion. They contacted Robert Tilton. We gave them some footage and pictures, and we connected them up with with Christy Beach. So Christy Beach actually had died at that point. She died of alcoholism. It was very sad, but her father let John Oliver's producer and the show use that footage of of the money that they gave as she was dying of cancer. That's one example. Christy Beach's family, and there's another, Mary Turk. Her mother was dying of colon cancer while she was giving all her money to Robert Tilton. There's another example. I'm trying to remember their names. They were giving money to Benny Hinn, and as she was dying of brain cancer. And people want to believe, in their desperation, they're giving money to these televangelists. And I just want to stand up and shout, hey, give your money to your local church, to the local mission, or to the homeless in your own community. Don't send it into these televangelists. You're perpetuating an organization that is top heavy and wasteful.
You mentioned some of these examples where people are still making donations despite being in dire financial circumstances or, having poor health. I guess what's bothering me is for a person or an organization present themselves as being godly. My question to you is, can someone that believes in God do they really believe in God, in your opinion? Like, can you be a man or woman of God and still do these things? Like, do these guys really believe in a higher power?
That's a good question. I think, like for Kenneth Copeland, yes, I think he believes in God. I think he truly believes in God. I think he's just convinced himself that this prosperity gospel is working because he sees it working in his own life. But I wish God would open his eyes and that he would repent from getting all this money from poor people. There are a few others that I don't believe they believe in God. There are this man that I was telling you about, Gene Ewing, who started St. Matthew's churches. I think he probably has convinced himself that maybe he believes in God a little bit, but this is a really good business opportunity. And then there was a fellow we interviewed in the early 90s that claimed that Robert Tilton he saw it as a great business opportunity. Just get yourself a tent, a big tent, and start holding tent revivals. And this is a way to really make money. And of course, if you heard of the documentary called Marjo, then he's a fellow that got into the religion business, the tent revival business, and that was very, very lucrative for him. So some of them, in the end, it's not mine to say whether they believe or not. It's God's choice. Who knows? They may repent from their evil ways.
Okay.
But I pray for them. I pray for their repentance.
Mm-hmm.
But some of them, I think most of them at least have convinced themselves that they believe in God.
On another level, some of the parishioners or donors convince themselves that they're giving money to honest people despite the evidence that might be right in front of them.
Yeah.
Like, I think some of these people may need to believe that this money is somehow, spiritually helping them or answering their presence in some way. But it also takes away from looking in the mirror. It's like, you may be making a foolish decision, but you have to convince yourself that you're not doing that. Can I ask, are you, outside of some of the misuse of money, are you seeing any other things in these investigations?
Yeah, for a while, one of the people I work with is famous for saying, one of his favorite sayings is that there's a snake pit at the top of a lot of these organizations. They're sexually. And we were seeing a whole lot of that in the 2000s. And some of it became public, and of course became public in the 90s too, with Jimmy Swaggart, visiting prostitutes, or Jim Baker and Jessica Hahn, or Paul Crouch and his tryst with Lonnie Ford. He's the fellow that wanted to out himself for his relationship. Or we have plenty of anecdotal evidence from family, even from family members, about Jan Crouch and her adulterous relationships. Then there's trying to remember the real famous one, the guy that was his name escapes me right now, but I think that it's not in all cases, but like I don't believe that Copeland is involved in anything like that. I don't believe that Jesse Duplantis is involved in anything like that. But it does smear the whole televangelist industry, really, and it is an industry. You think about how expensive television time is, and the television model for Christian television is totally different than it is for commercial television. Commercial television, the commercials pay for the broadcast. They get millions of dollars from their sponsors. Well, Christian television doesn't work that way. It's sold by the half hour or by the hour, or sometimes by the 15-minute segments. And so, like TBN, Trinity Broadcasting, would make, in some cases, $10,000 for a half-hour slot from a particular televangelist. So the televangelist, it's kind of the Darwinian, the success of the fittest, in the sense the ones that can raise the most money are the ones that are the most successful. The ones who can really scam people the best are the one and get the most money from their donors are the ones that rise to the top. And the survival of the fittest is kind of the television model for Christian broadcasting, and it shouldn't be that way. If you I'm seeing more television now as to what I believe it could have been all these years. Now, during the coronavirus, people talking, reaching out, saying, "Hey, this family is in need. Can you help them?" Or, "Hey, this restaurant is about to go out of business. Please help your local restaurants." And that's sort of what we here at Trinity Foundation envisioned 30, 40 years ago, that television could be. People are, this homeless person needs a home. Can you take them in? Anyway, that's a whole different matter. But that gives you an idea of a comparison of Christian, quote, Christian television, as opposed to what some people would say secular television. In a way, the reporters who are digging to get the truth are more like the prophets of our time than a lot like the prophets of old time.
It sounds like there's some limitations that the IRS, the federal government and maybe other law enforcement would have in terms of prosecution or prosecuting some of these people. Has there ever been, are there any examples of evidence you turned over that resulted in a conviction or a church shutting down or having a pastor removed?
I can think of one big one in all these years was when we gave evidence in court against a televangelist named W.V. Grant, and he was sent to prison for a year. We helped provide court evidence for his fraud, and that really is the main thing that sent him away. But we don't have a huge success ratio. And it's really because there are so many loopholes in our laws. And the separation of church and state. People, most prosecutors don't want to try a religious fraud case. In a few cases, there was one case that was won in the lower courts in the mid 1990s, with a case against Robert Tilton, but the lawyer for the victims did not file a timely response, and in the appeals court, so it was thrown out in appeals court. So there's not a lot of case law to allow for the prosecution of religious fraud. But to expand the subject for a minute, the head of the North American Securities Administrators Association, it's a long name, said that there's more money stolen in the name of God than any other way. And what she's looking at, they're sort of a state's organization to look at securities fraud. Similar to the SEC, but they're the state's version, and they find more people scamming other people in the name of God through what we call affinity fraud. So they'll befriend a pastor. The pastor will invest in this person's scheme, whatever it is, whatever it may be. And the pastor will start to make money. And so the pastor will convince a lot of his parishioners or congregation members to invest with this same fellow, and they'll they just lose all their money. It's a Ponzi scheme that starts with friendship between the scammer, the fraudster, and the pastor. And it happened a couple times with Benny Hinn. He let it happen, and really should have, in my opinion, received some of the criminal blame for it. But a guy named Greg Setzer, you can look it up, SETSER, was he raised over $160 million through befriending pastors and gaining investors, and the money financed his helicopter, his lavish lifestyle, and everything. And then when he finally got to prison, the feds recorded him trying to break out of prison. He made a phone call to some friends, and that just bought him more prison time. So
he tried to break out.
He was trying to get some people to get some money that he had stashed away somewhere, and the feds recorded the phone call, and they were supposed to get a helicopter and some machine guns and land in the courtyard of the prison at a certain time.
That's what drug cartel leaders do.
Yeah, really. And this guy was a Ponzi schemer, but he befriended Benny Hinn, and hundreds of people in Benny Hinn's organization lost money, and they eventually got a little bit of their money back, but not much. And then the other guy what's the name of the other guy? He helped another guy in California, in LA, in Hollywood. He had him on his broadcast and said, you should invest in this guy's company. And um, anyway, the man did a little bit of prison time. I think he was in prison a year, maybe.
You mentioned you got some threats in the 90s, I guess some angry, threatening phone calls. Has your organization ever been threatened with lawsuits, or did anybody ever follow through with lawsuits against your organization?
Yes. Yeah. We are, we're being sued right now. I can't say who because it's but I can say that in 2008 we were sued by Fred Price, and
he's an LA guy.
He's an LA guy, right?
Yeah, I used to see his broadcast as a kid.
Yeah, see, and he sued us and ABC News. ABC News aired a segment where he said, "This is an example of a bad preacher. He's got 3 private jets. He's got 7 luxury cars. He's got a 27-room mansion." But they didn't air the part. This is an example of a bad preacher. He said, "I've got." Then he said, "I've got." He was speaking in the first person. This is an example of a bad preacher. I've got 7 luxury cars, a different one for every day of the week. And so what happened was the ABC News didn't cut it. They didn't put the part in there where Fred Price said the part at the opening statement of "This is a bad preacher." But it's not that Fred Price didn't live, a little bit of luxuries himself. He admitted to the Bentleys he drove and things like that. But our insurance company basically forced us to settle out of court. So wasn't our decision.
What were the grounds of his suit? Was he accusing you of slander?
Yeah, slander.
How can that be if you're just stating the truth? How?
Well, they weren't. If you look at all of his statements, at the time, Fred Price only had 1 private jet. He didn't have 2. And it was a ministry jet owned by the ministry, not by him personally. And although he did spend vacation time in Hawaii, the cars he owned were, we figured out the value. They were 2, the Bentleys, and I mean, they were worth a lot of money. I don't want to go through the list. I don't want to focus on Fred Price. So, and I don't want to open an old wound between both of us. But they felt attacked, and but there has to be some admission that he was living. There never was any admission that he was living, that he had some extravagant lifestyle going on. Probably should steer away from that one since it's a court settlement.
Okay.
But anyway, so like I said, we're being sued right now. We were sued many times in the 90s by Robert Tilton. All those suits were eventually thrown out of court.
You sound like you're doing good work, but you sound like you're a small organization.
We are. We could be sued out of existence. This is a message to all the televangelists who are watching this podcast. If you want us to stop doing it, just keep sending us lawsuits. We couldn't hold up under a number of lawsuits.
Like, can I ask you get funding from donors and?
Yeah, up until the present time, we've been a public nonprofit organization, a 501c3. That means that a certain percentage of our money has to come from the public, and the IRS has a specific definition for that. In other words, people, if you're getting money from a lot of high dollar donors, you wouldn't meet that qualification. But if you're also getting money from the general public, then you are a public 501c3. Other than that, you become a private foundation after that. Mm. And we may have to become a private foundation. It depends on certain things.
See where I think Jerry Falwell Jr., who I believe is the president of Liberty University, like after the the coronavirus started spreading and a lot of cities started shutting down, and I guess at some point his school was closed down, and then he opened it back up. Like, do you personally have an opinion of a man of God who should have the best interests and health of his parishioners and his flock at heart? Do you have an opinion of that action of opening the school back up when this deadly virus is circulating?
Pick on Rodney Howard-Browne for a minute. Rodney Howard-Browne, he's famous for the Laughing Revival, or you could probably take Jerry Falwell Jr. too, but they claim they're being persecuted for their belief in God. No, you're not. You're being persecuted for being stupid. It's just you're putting people's lives in danger. So, you can say, hey, we're our right to gather, our freedom of expression here in the U.S., right to gather for religious meetings is being infringed. Well, it's just protecting the public.
We'll wrap up soon, but I want to ask if you had advice for parishioners, like what's the single most important piece of advice you can give people who've been very generous about donating money to a church or a pastor? Like what can people do to be more protective of their money and just be a little more discerning?
It's difficult when you don't have the tools to look into a ministry and see where the money's going. But you can certainly tell if they're wasting money on a corporate jet, and no matter what excuse they're using, it's going to be 10 times more expensive than flying a commercial. And then in those particular occasions when you can't reach your destination, then you can charter a plane. Look at the mansions. If they have, if they're living in a big mansion, check out our website if you can. Check out the Ministry Watch website. See if they've got information. And but try to find out the most you can about the organization before you give money. That's my recommendation. Mm-hmm. And don't give to to an organization that's not transparent.
And it sounds like you have some ideas or suggestions about, if this is a perfect world and you can make some changes to reform maybe what a church can assign towards salaries or just how they allocate money in general.
I would like to see the church in America go back to the home church model that existed in the first century, where more than 10, but less than 20 people would gather in a home and worship together, share together, confess together. How can you confess in a church of 500 people or 1,000 or 550,000 people? You can't. And so the small church model, and give to people in your own community, give to the need you see around you, and let your small church expand. Give to people you see that are poor in Africa or whatever, but stop giving to these large organizations that have to support a large administration at the top to keep it running. They're self-perpetuating, and they're just sucking up money.
You bring up an interesting point. when I guess for my personality, I'm more of I like intimate settings. Like I'd rather sit with a small group of 5 people and have a conversation versus, just some big ballroom. I wonder what's the attraction to being a part of a mega church? Is it just the aesthetics? It's the big production value? What's your hunch of what that is for people?
There's that, and there's anonymity. You can go and be there, and you're anonymous. You don't have to expose your own faults, your own sin to a group of people to be held responsible to your friends around you. You're like you would have done in the first century. And then, like you said, the production value, the entertainment value is there for in the mega churches, and that's not what church is. The Apostle Paul, Jesus Christ himself, nobody would recognize the church here in America today, the mega church especially.
That's all the questions I have, friend. Do you have anything else you like to share, like how people can get in contact with you if you guys, if they want to make a donation like myself?
We would appreciate it. You can go to our website at trinityfi.org. That's one way, and click on the make a donation or donate or become a member. Click on that link, and or go to our Facebook page and donate to. And if you feel like you've been victimized by a televangelist, please call us. Please call our number at 214-827-2625 and let us know how you've been victimized by a televangelist. Or if you have inside information about the fraud of a particular church or ministry that you work for or been involved in, please call that same number, 214-827-2625. But I appreciate your interview, Imani. And if you want to do this again, there's a lot we didn't cover.
Well, let's make it a point to do that. I mean, it's hard to cram everything in one episode, but yeah, let's definitely follow up at some point in the future. I'll be sure to put all the links that you mentioned in the YouTube description for those that are listening, and I'll put those on social media as well. And then, of course, I'll share the links.
I'll give you a Facebook link too, because obviously we have a Facebook page as well.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Pete. Good luck. Stay safe. It's kind of ironic. This is Good Friday that we're having this chat. But yeah, thank you again. Good luck to you. Say hello to, is it Barry and Oli?
Yeah, Barry and Oli. I'll say hello to him. I can hear Barry in the other room. He's on the phone. So.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. All right. Let him peek his face in before we say goodbye.
Hey.
All right. Hi, Imani. This is Barry. Barry, lean your face down so I can see your face. Hi. There you go. Okay.
How you doing, Barry?
Hello, investigator Barry. All right. All right. Thanks, Imani.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.